Welcome back to the Hero Report. My name is Ari Cohen. I am a professor of political science at the University of Nebraska. And over there, in my split screen, my friend Matt Langdon of the Hero Construction Company, way down under in Australia. Good morning or evening, whatever it is. Matt, how are you?
I am well this early afternoon. How about you there in Nebraska?
Doing okay this evening.
Excellent. So this week we wanted to talk about, mainly inspired by Carrie Fisher's passing. I think it's got me thinking about the influence that these fictional characters have on us as children, and it made me start thinking about a couple of parts to that puzzle. But I feel that I was definitely influenced by this Princess Leia character as a kid, and I think I probably didn't think much about it until this week. But it's amazing how positive of a sort of female character she was in that time to be, and maybe not in that time. I can't really comment on the late 70s as a time, but I wonder how much she sort of set my expectations for what women do. And then on top of that, it was the product of a single mother family sometime just after Star Wars came out. So it's, these things sort of affect us without us, I think, thinking about it, right? We're affected by our childhood, and that's why therapists make so much money, is these things stay hidden. The effects of our childhood stay pretty much under the radar, but there's definitely an effect there, and I thought, what better way to sort of highlight that than talking about it this week, see what it's all about.
Yeah, I think maybe I want to go back 2 steps and just say for the audience, I mean, we've been talking about this for days, but for people who are tuning in the middle of the conversation you and I have been having, it's important to say, I think, that we were both affected in a pretty deep way by Carrie Fisher's passing earlier this week. And at least for me, I don't want to speak for you, but at least for me, this was a bit of a surprise. I'm not normally someone who pays a great deal of attention to celebrity death. I know that people have been focused on it a lot this year because, of course, people our age are starting to lose the celebrities who were impactful in our childhoods. But I have to say, at least personally, David Bowie, Leonard Cohen, even Prince, people who passed away earlier this year, didn't sort of touch my life in the same way. And so their deaths, for me, while sad, obviously, were not at the same level in terms of the feeling that I had when I learned of Carrie Fisher's first heart attack and then finally her passing a couple of days ago. And, I think that that's sort of where maybe I want to jump into what you were saying, which is to note that there was something distinct, maybe for both of us, about Carrie Fisher. And in particular for me, I think a lot of people have commented online about Carrie Fisher as a person, right? Her personal struggles, the way that she dealt with them publicly, the way that she commented on them, the way that she became an advocate for normalizing mental health treatment and all of that sort of thing. I have to be honest with you, I didn't follow the life and times of Carrie Fisher at all. And so none of that really was on my radar screen. For me, the interaction with Carrie Fisher's passing was all about it was all about Princess Leia, to be perfectly honest. And I know that sounds perhaps odd. I think that maybe I'm unusual in that. I didn't get very involved in the rest of her life, but there was something about that character and the kind of heroism of Princess Leia in the Star Wars stories that really resonated with me in my childhood, and that I think, as you're saying, impacted the way I think about women and the role of women in hero stories and more broadly in the stories that we tell about our lives. What we think about women, what we expect from them, what they can do, all of those sorts of things. I think that the Leia character that Carrie Fisher brought to life, really played a very, very big role. And to lose the person who was still playing that role in really interesting ways, I think that really hit me this week.
Yeah. So I mean, I think it's something that's a little understated. Is that the heroism of Princess Leia in the first movie in particular? It's just kind of implicit in her, maybe in her role. She's set up as this politician who's rebelling. So her very nature, she's risking and perhaps sacrificing quite a bit right from the first time we see her, in ways that Luke is not. Luke has that hero's journey, whereas she's right in the mix of it, right from the start. And she just that I very much remember early on just loving her taking over the rescue mission on the Death Star. Just that kind of what are you guys doing? And off we go. And that continued. I mean, it was a really incredible character. I really think I haven't thought about. I definitely have not thought about her character in the sort of similar depth that I have of Luke and Han. And I'm sure that's gender based, but it's really interesting to look back on it. I also was thinking this week about how, or if the two male and one female mix of that film, how that played into my family of two brothers and a sister. Just the what that said about my world, like it just there's a lot about that. So I wonder. I don't want to get into my question about modern children yet, but who were the other heroes of yours as you were growing up? Who were the characters that you were looking at in, say, middle school, sort of the middle teenage years?
Yeah. So I guess the first thing I'll say, of course, is that the Star Wars universe for me was earlier than middle school, right? And so in that way, perhaps more formative than something else. I don't know for sure. But by the time you get to middle school and the early teenage years, you're already interested in what's cool. Whereas earlier, which is when I saw the Star Wars movies, it was something more immediate, something that really spoke to me. And the thing that I came to realize or came to recognize, I suppose as I went on and got older, is that, I mean, Leia is really the rebel, right? The reason she takes over the rescue mission is because this is what she's been doing, right? She knows all of these things, and the two men who come to rescue her, they don't know what they're doing. They bungle the rescue, right? They're shooting the console. They're talking to the Imperials. They have no idea where to go next. And she's the one who kind of plots the escape, and it's because ultimately that's what she's been doing from an early age, right? She's been in the rebellion as part of her childhood, and so of course, to watch the natural extension of that in The Force Awakens, where she's the rebel general who has broken away from the New Republic and is continuing the fight. Is very much sort of what you would expect from this character, and I think there's something very important about this, right? That for all the excitement around Luke Skywalker because he is a Force user and has the lightsaber and has the hero's journey, and for all the wittiness of the Han Solo character and the shoot first, ask questions later, devil may care attitude. Um, Leia is the true believer in fighting the Empire. And she's the one with the experience, and she's the one who is putting her life on the line all the time for a vision of democracy against authoritarianism and so on, right? I find that really incredible, and I think that I'm sure there are a lot of great internet think pieces to be written about this. But when it comes to risk, you know, for Leia, it's like it's all implied. There's no choice for her. She's already made that choice long before we ever meet her, and I think that's really fascinating. I think it's one of the things that is interesting, or that's potentially interesting about the Star Wars Rebels cartoon, is that you get occasionally an earlier glimpse of Princess Leia. It's one of the things that the expanded universe books always presented was Leia at different times in her life. That I think there's a lot that's really interesting there, and those universe books really present her in a kind of full character, making choices about whether she's going to continue as a politician or whether she'll go and do something else with her life. I mean, there's a very sort of more well-rounded character too, in a way, in those books that I suppose we won't see, unfortunately. But one of the things that I think is really important about her is the way that she is. She never questions taking these risks. She never questions whether she's doing the right thing. She knows that what she's fighting for is right. She knows all the inherent dangers, and she takes these people, in a sense, by like force of personality or force of will. She brings Han Solo and Luke Skywalker along with her in these first three films. I mean, she's the driving force, which I think is fascinating.
So let me step back to the question of who else was there when you were a kid.
Oh yeah.
So I was 10 when Return of the Jedi came out, and definitely remember going to the screening. And I struggle to think about what other stories were present in that age for me, because I certainly had a room full of Star Wars figures and Lego, and that was pretty much what I had. But I do think the other presence was Harrison Ford. I mean, I think he was sort of the dominant. I mean, he was Indiana Jones at that same time. He was Rick Deckard. He was a very prominent person there. And Luke was clearly that everybody aspires to have that experience of Luke. But then there was Harrison Ford. So
yeah.
So do you remember anyone else that was specifically that you were consuming at that time, story wise?
Yeah, but see, I'm obviously much younger than you.
Right.
And so for me, like the real people, right? It was obviously the big three from Star Wars. It was Indiana Jones. Certainly Goonies, right? The Goonies movie had a great hero story to it. But then for me, a lot of cartoons, right? I mean, not a lot of other live action films that I remember. But certainly He-Man and Transformers were huge in my world at that time, right around the same time. And I think that there is something interesting for me in the recognition that there were not a lot of other live action heroes that I had. If I'm playing with my toys, I'm playing with my Star Wars action figures and my G.I. Joe and He-Man and Transformers. I'm not, and I certainly saw E.T., but it certainly wasn't the same thing. And I saw, um, Raiders with Harrison Ford. But the reason that Star Wars played such a big part in my life, I think, is because of the age that I was, right? And so that I wasn't going to see a lot of other live action movies with these hero stories. The stuff if I was watching stuff, it was rented and it was old, right? We were watching like the Herbie movies, right, where the hero is the car. So it's very different. My engagement with the Star Wars movies, like those were the heroes, and my other heroes, right? The other idols that I had were, sports figures, right? Which is an entirely different thing, right? They don't bring the same thing to the table in any way. The story is not the same. Being a great baseball player and hitting the series-winning home run simply isn't the same thing as being Luke or Leia or Han Solo. So the centrality of those stories, just because of the time in which they hit me, I think is, it really makes them a kind of standalone thing, which I think explains why I spend so much time in this universe, why I'm so interested in it.
And so I'm really curious about the effects that these, and I know there's research out there, but we're talking about our own experiences here. I'm curious about what effect you think those stories had on you, and how they affect you now, because I definitely would attribute my interest and passion for travel to Indiana Jones and maybe even Star Wars too. That just getting out of the desert planet, which it was a big deal for me to travel. I didn't have the means to do it until I was 21, and I have never looked back. But I think that was a big part. I think that sort of sense of adventure, that longing for adventure, is really present and is still present for me.
Yeah, I think that I probably share a little bit of that. I certainly don't have it to the extent that you do, but there's an undeniable feeling of excitement that I still have at this point in my life when the airplane is about to touch down in the place where I'm going, right? And I know that I'm going to get off the plane in a place where people don't speak the language that I speak, and I'll have to find my way around, and I'll have to figure out which trains to take and where will they take me and what will I do when I get there. There's an undeniable excitement, and I mean, for me, it's visceral, right? That excitement is something that I feel. It's not simply like something I intellectualize, but physically I feel the excitement when I'm about to embark, on that journey. So I think undeniably I share that with you. I don't travel perhaps as much, but I certainly love it, and I get something from it every time that I do. I also think. I think the way that I think about, if I'm thinking about Leia in particular and Carrie Fisher, I think about women a certain way, I'm convinced, as a result of my engagement with this universe and with that character, because she is in control. She is one of the central figures. Someone posted somewhere, I think it was on Twitter, maybe it was on Facebook, this image, I think it was from Empire, where she is speaking, and there's just a huge group of men in their uniforms surrounding her, all of them listening to her as she's sort of setting out the plan and what they're going to do. I think this is the scene where they're evacuating the base on Hoth. And there's something really formative about that, because, again, this is, 1979, 1980? And here is this young woman who is a military commander, and there is no question that everybody is listening to what she's saying. Everyone is taking their orders from her, and she knows exactly what to tell them and where they're going to go and what they're going to do, and she's right. She has it all planned out, and I think that sense of command is something that certainly when I look, I mean, my playmate when I was playing the Star Wars action figures was my younger sister, right? And sometimes she had to be the bad guy, so she was the Darth Vader character or the Emperor character, but she was also, of course, the Princess Leia character. And I'm sure my sister is a very strong woman, and my interaction with her is always as an equal. I think the same thing about my wife, right? That the kind of person that I want to spend my life with and raise a family and all these sorts of things is the kind of person who has a commanding presence, who is no shrinking violet, right? Who is an absolute equal and a partner, and who has a plan. I think that those are the kinds of things that if we're psychoanalyzing ourselves, we can trace back to childhood without a doubt.
Yeah, for sure. So the thing that I somewhat regularly think about, and I probably that regularity is because I'm raising a kid, is the just vast number of stories that they have access to now. And I know, like, I occasionally look at lists of the movies that came out in the 80s, and you can see on Wikipedia they've got the list of every movie that came out in 1981 or whatever, and which weeks they came out, and you can look through that, and just there are years where I can remember every movie, and you certainly can't do that now. There's a market for reaching these eyes, and it's not, I think, so much the number, or that's certainly part of it, but the frequency. So, we watched Star Wars, and we kept watching it for years, and now it's what's the latest, and you can't watch everything that comes out anymore as an adult, let alone as a kid. And so I wonder about that, and whether we're going to have a generation that has that same experience. I was talking to my wife about this a few days ago when Carrie Fisher died, that everyone's talking about 2016 and how terrible it is, but I've got, you alluded to it earlier, I've got bad news for you if you're our age. It's only going to get worse. It's because of a couple of things. Because we're of an age where things started coming out and communication started getting easier and quicker. We have these shared experiences because they were memorable, because they came out and they were an event. And now I wonder, like, my kid in 30 years' time what's the news going to look like? Are they going to be mourning the death of Britney Spears, or like, are they having that same experience, or are they going to have that same experience? The sheer number of people that get called celebrities now, they can't possibly list everyone that dies in 30 years' time. So I wonder what are your thoughts on that? Because you're raising a brood as well.
Yeah, it's a good question. I don't know that there's any way that we can know. I do think that there were some things that were, that there are like distinct cultural touchstones of a certain time and place and whatever. And in some sense, I don't think that we're in a position to know what those will be for our kids. I wonder, I really do. I wonder how many, will our kids care about Daisy Ridley in the same way that we cared about Carrie Fisher? I don't know. I mean, Star Wars is certainly still a phenomenon, right? It is again, or something. Will there be some of these kind of touchstones, things that everybody knows about or that impacts everybody in some way? Will there be these sort of global characters? I think that for people who are between our age and our children's age, maybe people who are in their teens now or their early 20s now, maybe Lady Gaga is a character like that, right? Maybe the way that she engaged with her fans and the kind of causes that she took up. She might be that kind of a person. I think, there are certainly pop stars, musicians whose passing everybody will take note of, but I don't think that it's the same kind of heroic story that we're talking about, right? I don't know what those filmed stories will be. Will it be the Harry Potter kids? Right? I would think so. Right? I would guess that those are the kind of stories that will continue to resonate, and I think that those are the kind of things that will pick up. People will pick them up as they go. In other words, my kids don't know the first thing about Harry Potter. If you said Harry Potter to my 6-year-old, he doesn't know what it is. But we have a lot. We certainly have plans to start reading those books with him when he hits a certain age, and then my sense is he'll watch the films and he'll get to know those actors, right? And so as he gets older, he'll have some kind of engagement, I assume, with Daniel Radcliffe, for example, because that's the face of Harry Potter. I don't know whatever else, right? But that's the first one that comes to mind.
Yeah, I guess there are some stories that do cut through the noise. That's certainly one of them, and partially because it was so broad and happened over years. So that's definitely part of it. That makes it similar to our experience with Star Wars.
Yeah.
And I think probably the Marvel Avengers movies have cut through that as well. I think there's some there are characters that you sort of revisit over years. But certainly, I mean, Star Wars was every few years, and there was I certainly don't remember any waning of interest between the movies for me. And now you're competing with maybe 2 Pixar movies every year, or a Pixar movie, a Disney movie, a Star Wars movie, an Avengers movie, or 2 Marvel movies. It's such a barrage, and I wonder, is Harry Potter even doable again now? I mean, what was that? 10? Right. It's more than 10 years ago, right? That the first book came out. But
much
more than 10 years. So. And since then we've had these books that have made an impact, like Hunger Games and the Divergent series. I mean, frankly, I hadn't heard about Divergent until the movie came out, but they're obviously reaching a lot of people. Maybe that's the key, is to have that longevity. You can't have the impact unless you've got sort of that repetition. So I wonder, like, Moana, that's out now. Everybody loves it, right? But who's going to remember it a year from now? Is it, even Frozen, 3 years ago that came out. It's sort of, I mean, it's in the supermarket still in town, but
we're still living it here in our house.
So. Yeah, it's a really interesting, and what effect is that going to have? And I see my kid has the potential to be watching dozens and dozens of different characters and stories, but actually she doesn't want to do that. Frozen 3 years ago, she definitely got into, and that was at least a year. That was the only thing she was interested in. A year ago, she watched the Descendants movie. Which is the Disney movie of all the kids of the villains, and just fell in love with it to the point that's still her thing a year later. She doesn't really consume a lot of stuff, but I don't know if that's the normal experience of kids today. she doesn't want. She's very interested in one thing at a time. So I wonder, maybe I'm not experiencing this media in the same way as my kid, obviously, but I can see how much there is. But maybe kids just aren't seeing how much there is. They're just seeing what they see.
Yeah, I think it's almost certainly the case the kids are not seeing how much there is, right? I'm like you. I'm overwhelmed by the number of stories that exist right now. The amount of intellectual property that's being mined by these corporations. I mean, the Marvel movies all run one into the next. I've seen them all at this point, but I'm a little bit weary at this point, right? And there are an infinite number of additional movies coming out, and that's hard, right? It's hard to care every time, but my kids aren't seeing any of it, right? In a sense, I'm curating at this age anyway. I'm curating their experience for them, but I think that's the same. In the same way that my childhood was curated for me, right? I didn't see the first Star Wars movie I saw was Jedi, right? And then I went back and watched the other two on video, and I think that I was talking with my oldest today about Star Wars, which he loves but doesn't know the first thing about. He's never seen them. And we talked about what we would, when we would watch them and how we would watch them. And I said, well, it's kind of like comic books. There's like a 1 and a 2 and a 3 and a 4, and we're going to start with 4. And he said, well, why? And I said, well, that's the way I saw, that's the way that you're going to see them. That's the way they were made. I think, a great deal of internet ink was spent talking about this question of what order you show your kids the Star Wars movies in. But it only makes sense to show them one way, right? It doesn't make sense to start with episode 1 and just work your way through. That's what a crazy person would do. So we're always, parents are always curating this stuff for children. My grandmother took me to see E.T. in the theater. I was way too young for it, and I think I left screaming and crying. It was very upsetting when E.T. got sick. We have to kind of sort this kind of stuff out for our kids. A lot of my son's friends have seen the Avengers and the Avengers #2 and whatever. My kid's not going to see those now. He's not ready for that. The kind of destruction and whatever that goes on there. He has the action figures. He plays with Captain America and Hulk, and he thinks it's cool. And I've got a Hulk comic here signed by Len Wein, from our Hero Roundtable a couple of years ago. And he really, he's excited to read that, but he's not at the right age. So we're picking and choosing the stories that are right for him. We went and saw Moana. And it was perfect. It was a great hero story. It was good for him and good for his sister. But we're picking and choosing these things carefully. And in a little while he'll be ready to move up to the next level. And then again, I'm not just going to open the floodgates and say, hey, I don't know if you know this, but there's 27 Marvel movies out there. We can just start binge watching them. I think that. Again, it has to be kind of done in a thoughtful way, or it kind of loses. I don't know what it is, if it's what it loses, but certainly something is lost in just kind of whipping through all of this stuff to sort of say, well, now we've seen it, right? We know how the story goes, because in some sense, at least for me, it's not about the story. Right? It's about the characters. The reason that Iron Man is successful, I think, is because of the way the character is written. not because Iron Man does X and then he does Y and finally he does Z. Who cares, right? That's formulaic. The thing that matters is the way that Tony Stark is written and the way that Robert Downey brings that character to life. That's the value in Iron Man, and it's why some of those stories really work, and some of them don't work as well.
Yeah, very true. And I mean, that whole curating thing is parenting, and but it's not. It's clearly not happening with everyone, right? My wife teaches 2nd and 3rd grade, and they were watching movies at the end of the school year, and so I think she asked the kids what they recommended, and one of the kids said Vacation, and then immediately came back and said, no, that's not appropriate for our class. So clearly that kid has seen Vacation, clearly is not a movie for that kid, and that kid knows that it's not a movie for him. So there's something to that, and it's more than just what's appropriate. It's what messages do you want to send your kids in the movies that you're having them watch. It's a delicate balance too, because you also sort of want them to experience movies by themselves and start judging what's a good movie and what's a bad movie. I think it's a good time to shout out to David Rendell, who clearly has no judgment on what's a good movie and what's a bad movie, and maybe that's down to what his parents let him watch when he was a kid. But there's a lot of that. I mean, there's a lot of if you consume everything and everything's just a spectacle, or if you're giving your kids everything, what message are you sending? Are the messages getting lost? Because you could certainly let your kid watch 2 movies every day, and they would never exhaust the movies that are out there.
Right.
And I think there's repetition too. That the fact that we watched Star Wars over and over again is what puts it into our head, and kids look for patterns. They need patterns. My kid watched this mermaid TV show and finished the season and was like, okay, I'm going to start again, because it's that comfort. And I think it's also finding new things in those repeated views, and it does imprint, and that's going to be something that she can reference internally and externally.
Yeah, I think that's right. I'm struck. I really am struck by the parents who took their kids to go see Force Awakens or Rogue One as like their first Star Wars experience. I think that's a huge mistake. I think that look, there's something awesome about seeing Star Wars on the big screen, right? I love it, but I don't think I would care about Star Wars if that was how I started. Can you imagine if the first thing that your first experience with Han Solo is that he gets killed? What a loss, right? And then to go back and then see what the character was, I don't think that you care in the same way. Which incidentally is also why I think anybody who saw the prequels before they saw 4, 5, and 6, it's a huge miss, right? All that stuff about baby Anakin Skywalker, the pod racer, and then to get to Darth Vader, just throwing people around on the Rebel ship in Episode 4 at the beginning. I can't imagine what that's like. So, gosh, I do think that this idea of curation, in a sense, that's kind of what hero stories have always been about, right? Going back to, this is my territory, right? But, I was just teaching Plato's Republic, and Socrates is talking about the way that we should educate young people, and he says, well, Homer is great, but we can't have Homer teaching these lessons to these children, right? He says that Achilles said the following and did the following, but we all know Achilles would never do that, right? We have to cut that part out of the Iliad, because Achilles wouldn't act that way. We should just teach the positive lessons. This idea of curating our hero stories is very, very old, because there are messages that you want people to learn. There are character arcs and storylines that are put there for a reason. This story was told in this order on purpose, right? I mean, some of it I don't agree with, obviously, but nonetheless, like it was purposive. It was design. If I'm going to show my kids Indiana Jones, I'm not going to start with the Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, right? I'm likely never going to show them Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. But certainly you wouldn't begin there.
Yeah, my kid's not watching the prequels until she's 18, and she can make that decision herself.
Yeah, it's not part of the story that I think matters, right? I mean, I don't think it gives you anything else. I don't think that it's additive, right? I think that it's just a lesson in what you can do with computer-generated imagery. And I don't think that matters for this universe. I'd rather have him play Knights of the Old Republic on my computer than watch the prequels.
Right. So, I mean, I think this is a good time to conclude our latest pod. So I think that's our message. Is as if you're a parent, you should be thinking about what you're curating, and frame it in the lens of what your experience was as a kid. What are the stories that you remember? Think about how they influence you, and so then think about what movies and TV shows that you're putting your kids in front of.
Yeah, I think that's such a key. If we're thinking about a takeaway here, given the impact that someone like Carrie Fisher had because of the way her character was written, because of the way she brought that character to life on the screen, if you think as a parent about what that meant in your life, that ought to impact the choices you make in curating stories about heroes for your kids. I think that's so important. I didn't know we were going to end there, Matt. That was that's a pleasant surprise. Maybe you did. I bet you have notes to take us in this direction. In which case, good on you. But I think that's just a terrific way to end this. Well, for me anyway. Thanks, Carrie Fisher. This was It was a great part of my childhood, and one that continued on into adulthood. That performance that she gave in 4 films really was something formative for me.
Absolutely. So I think we'll try to ask our Patreon viewers and then later our podcast viewers who your heroes were when you were growing up. It'll be interesting to get an answer from someone like Brian Richess, who's about God knows how much younger he is than us, but what his experience as a child with the stories was. And have we got anyone younger than Brian that watches the show? Probably somewhere.
Oh, I'm sure we do. Thomas?
There you go. So, with that, leave a comment. You can leave it on Patreon in the comments there or on HeroReport.com. And we hope you had or have a good new year, depending on when this gets uploaded with Australian internet. And we'll see you again soon.
Yes, absolutely. Happy New Year. Thanks, Matt. Thanks to our patrons and to everyone watching this podcast. If you're not a patron yet, patreon.com/heroconstruction. it's as low as $1 a month to support the work that we're doing at the Hero Construction Company, to keep these podcasts flowing, to get them early before anyone else, as well as all sorts of other great gifts and questions and opportunities. Join us over there.